Welcome to Davinci Resolved. For our first ever tutorial, we're going to be recreating this. The heat vision effect from the TV show Smallville. So first of all, I've already gone ahead and loaded our footage into the timeline, and we want to jump straight to the Fusion tab. So the first step in this process is to track our eyes. So let's go ahead and hit Control Spacebar and add a tracker node, and we're going to track the corner of our eye so that we can get the motion of that. So I'm just going to adjust the search box as well as the tracker itself, and then we need to hit track forward from current time, and that should hopefully stick pretty well to the corner of our eye. Now it doesn't matter too much if it doesn't track well at the beginning or the end, because while the heat vision's not on, we don't need that tracking data, but as long as you have a good track for the middle, that's what's important. So I started in the middle of the clip, so I'm going to need to hit track reverse from current time in order to get the rest of the clip tracked. And there we go, that's a pretty good track. So I'm going to rename the tracker, hit F2 and call it right eye. I know it's my left eye, but just for the sake of being easily able to see which is which, I'm going to name it that. And then let's do the same for our left eye. So again, I'm going to add a tracker node, pipe our media in, and hit 2 on the keyboard to bring that into our viewer. Let's drag that over here to the corner of our eye, resize that. In fact, I'm going to track the top of the eyebrow in this bit because I know that this part of my eye is going to get occluded by my face at some point. So let's resize that. And again, we'll hit track forward. And again, that's a pretty solid track. So let's go ahead and rename this left eye. So now we've got our tracking data. The next thing we need to do is add our fiery noise effect, which appears in the iris of the eye whenever the heat vision is activated. And to do that, we're going to use a fast noise node. So Control Spacebar, and we're searching for fast noise. 2 on the keyboard, we'll put that in our viewer. Okay, so we're going to need to up the detail of our noise and the scale as well. So we've got lots of nice detail to be shown in the eye. And then let's switch to the color tab up here and make sure it's on 2 color, and we can select a fiery red for our first color, and for our second color we'll choose something like a bright yellow. And there we go, we've already got quite a fiery effect there, but this isn't doing anything right now, so we need to animate it. So click back on our noise tab and turn up the seethe rate, and this will procedurally animate the texture. There we go, so that's looking pretty fiery already. Now we need to merge this fast noise over our footage, so to do that we're going to type Control Spacebar and then search for a merge. Let's put our media in, and then our fast noise over that. Hit 2 on the keyboard, and there we go. We've got our animated noise over our footage. Now we've got our fast noise node ready. We need it to track to our eye. So let's hit Control Space and search XF to bring up a transform node. Then we can right click our center property, connect to, tracker path 1, position. And now that will track to our right eye. Now that's tracking along. Okay, we're slowly but surely getting there. We now need to track in a mask. Now because we've already tracked the eye position, we get that information for free. So let's click on our fast noise and click on ellipse. Now this is piped into the fast noise mask channel, so everything that goes into these blue inputs will be masked. So let's zoom in, and we want to resize this ellipse so it's covering the entirety of our iris, like so. Okay, so we've already got, as you can see, that ellipse is going to track along with our tracked eye. But we don't want the whole eye, we just want the iris. So click on ellipse and we'll hit click on another ellipse there, which will pipe it in. And this one we want to use to key out the pupil of the eye. So let's shrink that down. And over here, we want to click on paint mode and set it to subtract. So now everything into this mask here will subtract from everything else. So we want to place that over our pupil. Just get an idea of roughly where that's going, like so, and that's our pupil masked. And finally, we want to add a mask so that we're not getting the eyelid in here as well. So this time we'll click on our second ellipse and we'll click on polygon, and we can just draw a very rough shape around our eye, like that. One thing I like to do as well, we can do a box select and hit Shift S, it will just smooth out those points as well, so the mask is a little less jagged. But as you can see, that's adding it in, so what we want to do is set it to subtract, so it subtracts everything from the previous masks and then invert, and then it will only mask out everything around the eye. And there we go, we've got one eye already done. Now as you can see, there are a few points where it does slip off slightly, so to fix that, what we can do is we can add another transform node and keyframe with properties. So this first transform, I'm going to rename it to transform eye track right, and that contains all our tracking data. So now let's add another transform node, and we can independently move this around now to match up with our eye, but it's a lot quicker than keyframing it manually. So on our transform node, let's go ahead and click on the keyframe button up here, and that will keyframe the position, the center, and just anywhere we notice it goes off slightly. Where was it? I saw one earlier. Keyframe, we can just slightly move it to match up with our footage better. Let's play that through. Okay, there we go, you can see where that's gone off. So let's go to a point where it's still matching, and we'll just put a keyframe in there, and then we'll move it to where it's gone off, and we'll move that back there. And there we go, it's much easier than keyframing the entire thing manually, but there we go. So our eye is already pretty nicely tracking. So now we have our eye pretty well tracked on. Here we need to blend it into our source footage better. So what we'll do is we'll click on our merge node, set the apply mode to hard light, and then we can play with the blend slider to get it to just look a little bit more natural. Now as you can see, the edges are still way too sharp to look realistic, so we'll deal with that in a second. We'll turn the blend down first of all, and then if we go into our masks, for example our first ellipse mask, we can click on soft edge, and that will blur out our mask slightly for us, but a little goes a long way in this case. So hold down the control key when dragging the slider and you'll get very precise controls over that. So let's drag that to something that looks a bit more natural, and we'll do the same for our pupil. Not too much, but just enough to make it blend nicely. Finally, we need to animate in our heat vision turning on and off. Now to do that, we can do so using the blend slider on our merge node. So looking at that, let's grab our blend, and let's just make a note of the current value. It's 7.756. So we'll start the footage with that set to 0, and let's play through the footage, and we'll get to a point where we want it to start turning on, and I reckon about there. So let's set a keyframe for our blend, 0, and then maybe about here we'll have it pop in. Let's see. Okay, there we go. And then we need to do the same the other side when the heat vision turns off. So let's wait till we get to about here maybe, and we'll set another keyframe, 756, and then we want it back to 0 a few frames later. And there we go. Heat vision turns on, heat vision turns off. Now one other effect you may want to add if you want to emulate the show's heat vision, is that just before Clark's heat vision turns on and off, his pupils dilate. Now, because we already have a pupil mask here, we can actually just simply animate this in using the border width control. And because the eyes are a little bit further away from the camera, I can get away with using this border width to make it look like the pupils dilating. So what we'll do is we'll get to around here when the heat vision turns on, animate our border width, we'll let it play out a few frames, and again, holding down control, we have fine tuned controls over how far we want to push this. So let's put it to about there and see what that looks like. And then we want the pupil to come back in again to what it was. So playing this through, we get this. And I think that looks pretty good. Now I've gone and done the second eye off camera just to save time, but let me explain to you very quickly how I did it. And that was simply by copying these nodes here, pasting them here, and then instead of tracking the center of this node to the right eye, I tracked it to the left eye, tidied up some of the dodgy keyframes with the transform node, and then edited these masks here to fit my left eye instead of the right eye, and everything else took care of itself. Then used a merge node just to merge that on top, and also keyframed in the blend properties as well. So you're left with the final effect of two eyes coming in and out roughly at the same time. Okay, so now onto the actual heat vision beam itself. Now before we get started with this, as you can see, I've very roughly just keyed myself out of the background. I was filming in front of quite a light wall, so I was able to use the Luma keyer to key myself out and just put myself in front of a very generic city backdrop, just so that you guys can see what the heat vision is going to look like against some actual footage. But you could either use a green screen, or you could even just film your footage on location, and then you won't have to mess around with this at all. But just by putting this backdrop in, you'll be able to see the effect that the heat vision has a bit better than against a white wall. So on with the effect. It's actually a 3D effect, so we need to start with a shape 3D, which is going to be the basis for our heat vision itself. Then we need to pipe that into a merge 3D. And then whenever we're using anything 3D, we need to render it before we can merge it over footage. So we need to pipe into that a renderer 3D. And there's what we have so far. Now currently shape 3D you'll see is set to plane by default, so we want to set that to a cylinder. And then we can start playing around with the position of it. So the transform tab, we can move that back in Z space like so. That's going to move it away from our camera. Let's rotate it a bit there, and we can rotate it in Y as well, and rotate that a bit more there. If we go back to our shape, we can change the height as well. Let's give that a bit more height. Let's set that to something like 150 maybe, so we've got a nice long beam. And now we want to transform it so that the very edge of our heat vision is on the edge of our screen. Okay, like so. Now we've got this heat vision, we can merge it on top of our footage. So let's grab that renderer and drag from the output onto the output of the merge, and that will automatically create a new merge node with the heat vision beam on top. There we go. So let's get this into place now. So we'll grab our renderer, hit Control spacebar, and get a transform node. And with that transform node, we can simply drag that over our eye position here. Okay. Now under center, let's right click that, connect to, tracker path 1 position, and that will attach it to our eye. So now we want to create another transform node, just like we did before, to position it. Now it's tracked correctly, so let's just move that over there. Okay, now the beam's looking way too big still, so we can go back into our shape 3D and we can either scale it down, but I'm just going to move it away from the camera and then translate it into place until we've got something that suits our purposes. Let's give it a bit of a rotate as well, because we don't want that sort of coming towards the camera ever so slightly at an angle. Okay, there we go. Now obviously that doesn't look anything like our final effect yet, but it's a start. What we need to do now is add a light into our scene, because we want to be able to see properly the displacement that we're going to be putting on this cylinder. So let's click on renderer first, and we want to enable lighting, and I'll also set the renderer type to opengl, because that will render things a lot faster for you. Now our heat vision's gone black. That's because there's no lighting in the scene, so we need to add a light. Control spacebar, and let's search light, and in this case we're going to use a point light. Pipe that into our merge 3D scene, and now we can see we've got a bit of texture back. Now the idea behind this effect is to take this cylinder and run it through a displacement modifier attached to a fast noise texture. So that fast noise will drive the displacement of this shape and will give us that kind of warped effect that we're looking for, and it will simulate the effect of the beam actually moving when essentially it's going to be stationary. I'll show you what I mean. Let's first take our shape and go to the controls tab, and we're going to need to add some subdivisions in. Now we just want to crank up our subdivisions here, because the more subdivisions we have, the more effective our displacement map is going to be. So we can turn wireframe back off here, and now with Control Enter we're going to start searching for displace, and we're going to choose the displace 3D node. Now we already have some fast noise which we've set up to an interesting texture, so in this case I'm going to copy this fast noise here, I'm going to put it over here, and I'm going to pipe that into the displace 3D node, and there we go. You can instantly see that we've got something going on here. We've got some displacement going on, and if we hit play, we've already even got a little bit of animation there, because it's taking that information from the seed rate that we put into the fast noise texture. Let's work on this some more. Let's have a look at our scale. So the more we crank the scale up on this, the more we're going to get some interesting displacements. Let's check our subdivisions. Let's subdivide that some more. Not too much, just enough so that we get a nice texture going on there. We can change the radius as well from here, so we can match that to our eyes slightly better, and there we go. Let's have a look at our fast noise. Now if we up the contrast, we will get much more severe displacement going on, so we can do that to give it a bit more texture. And now if we go back to our displace and change the bias and the scale, we can also play around with the intensity. So play around with this until you get something that you like. I think for me, something about there looks quite good. Yeah, let's leave it there. I may actually just scale down the radius ever so slightly. Okay, good. So now we want to blend our beam into our footage. So let's click on merge node, and generally I like to set this to overlay, so we can see our footage behind while still getting that distortion. Let's click on our shape, and we'll also go to the material, and we'll just add a little bit of color in here, not too much because we're going to be color correcting this later, but just so we have a better idea of what's going on. Next we want to add a color corrector node, so let's type CC color corrector, and in our master we'll start adding some red in, but again not too much. You add too much and it looks, well, pretty cartoony really, so we want to just add just a tad in there. And let's just move our nodes up a bit as well to give us some room to play with. Okay, and you'll also notice that the shadows of this are very accentuated from the light, so we can fix this a couple of ways. We can move the light around maybe to a slightly better position, but in this case one of the better ways of doing it I've found is by using the color corrector node, switching over to our colors, shadows, and then taking the contrast and bringing it down, and that will get rid of some of those shadows that we don't want there. Now, one thing you'll notice is when you play around with the contrast, there's a strange either white border or a black border, and this is because the color correction is affecting the alpha value as well. So what we need to do after we've done this is add in an alpha multiply node. So control spacebar, let's start typing multiply, and we get alpha multiply. Add that in, and now if we move our contrast down, you'll notice that you don't get the same white halo around. We can also add some variation by going to our midtones and maybe adding some more yellowy orange in there. We can then take our highlights and change the color there. Play around to your heart's content till you get something that you like the look of. That's what's important, something that looks good. The next issue we have is that our heat vision is now looking way too crisp. We want it to look nice and blended with the scene, so after our alpha multiply, we'll add a blur node. And again, just the tiniest bit goes a long way here, so hold down control and get it somewhere so it's not looking too crisp but you don't lose all the detail in your blur. And the great thing about these nodes is at any time you can go back to your shape 3D and you can play around with things like the rotation, the scale, the position, and get this however you want it, get it looking absolutely perfect. Just going back and forth, iterating until you get exactly what you want. In my case, I think I'm going to rotate this a little bit more in the Y value just because it's coming off at a slight angle. Okay, that's looking better. So now we've got our beam, we want to add some displacement. So in this case I've just taken a 2D displacement node and I'm adding that to the background because we want the heat to distort everything there. So let's hold down shift and just click and drag, and now we have some displacement. So set to radial, we need to pipe in our texture. So we want to take this texture and pipe that into the displacement. So let's grab our blur and just shove it right there, and you'll see that we've got some nice displacement going on. With our fraction strength we can say how much we want the displacement to affect. Somewhere around there looks good. For our second heat vision beam on our other eye, it was simply a case of just copying and pasting these three nodes here. So if we copy, paste, we can put that into our merge 3D node. Now if you want to be super neat and tidy, you can select all these, hold control and press spacebar and start typing under for underlay, and you can then group these together. So I could do the same here, underlay, and if you alt click on the underlay itself and hit F2 you can rename it. So we can call this one right eye beam, alt click on this one so it just selects the underlay, F2 again, left eye beam. So now we have two heat vision beams. Click on our shape 3D for our left eye beam and then go to the transform tab. We can then just move this wherever we want it. Look at that, to match up with the shot. Let's move that slightly away in Z space, slightly up in Y. Just get that lined up with our eye nicely there. And all being well, when we hit play, get a pretty decent effect. Now the problem with copying these across is they now have exactly the same texture driving them. So we also want to click on our fast noise and change the seed, because that will change the random seed that the heat vision gets, and that way we'll just get a bit of variation on each beam. We don't want them looking exactly the same. So now all that remains is for us to animate our heat vision beams coming in and out, which we can do with another mask. So our heat vision is in this node here, that's where the beam's attached, so let's use another ellipse, and we'll keep this off screen for now, and we want it to come in at a point where just after the pupils dilate maybe. So let's put it here and we'll animate the center position, and I'm going to keyframe in the width and the height just in case they change as well. And let's put a keyframe here, and then roughly about here we want our beams to be fully activated. So let's have a look what we've got. Okay, not too bad. A little on the slow side I think, so let's click on keyframes up here and our ellipse. If we click the drop down here and scale, we've got all of our keyframes that we've put in for our ellipse here. We've got the width and the center path displacement. So what we can do is take these keyframes and just move them up slightly so that they come in a bit sooner. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, even that might be slightly too slow. I'm going to just budge that up a hair. Okay, I think I'm happy with that. Now obviously on this ellipse mask the corners are way too sharp again, so let's click on our ellipse and use soft edge just to soften out that edge so that it's a bit more smooth. Turn off keyframes, we don't need those. And at full speed, okay, not bad. Okay, so now we just have to do exactly the same thing but for our heat vision to turn off. So we're gonna get to a point where we think it should roughly be turning off. Let's say maybe about here. Let's just put a keyframe in as well. We'll just nudge this slightly and that will add a keyframe to tell us that we don't really want this to move until this point. And then about here we want the heat vision to be turned off, so we'll take it off screen. Remember, we want to go this way because we don't want the heat vision to go back into the actor's eyes. We want it to disappear. Now that in this case might be slightly too fast, so let's bring up our keyframes again, click on our ellipse, take this and just drag it out slightly and see what that looks like. Yeah, not bad. Quite pleased with that. And one final thing that I forgot to mention is that the displacement, as you can see, hasn't been masked, so we need to make sure that this ellipse also gets plugged into our displacement node because we don't want it to be displacing when there's no heat vision turned on. Nice. And that roughly brings us to the end of our tutorial. There's a few more things that you might want to do, such as just dialing down these eyes a little bit because they're quite intense. So if we go to our merge here and take our blend down, we can control the blends here and make them perhaps a little less obvious. But other than that, that's the effect finished. So thanks very much for sticking with it and watching the very first ever Davinci Resolve tutorial. If you liked it, please leave a like, and if you want to see more, please hit that subscribe button. I'm planning on doing a tutorial once every week. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.